So good morning, students, everyone. Welcome back. So we are continuing our lectures on Introduction to International Relations. हम लोग अभी कल तक हमने let me just give you a quick recap. कल तक हमने क्या-क्या किया and today we are going to continue with that. आपके syllabus में there are 3 units. I'm just recollecting everything so that it becomes easier for you to take up. तो आपके syllabus में there are 3 units. So first unit is all about early debates, which is approaches, different theoretical perspectives to international relations. That unit also includes introduction. Introduction में हमने first lecture में we covered why do we study international relations, हम क्यों पढ़ते हैं, what is the relevance, what are the scope, how is international relations different from international politics, और very briefly we touched upon different approaches. हम आगे आने वाले lectures में क्या क्या करने वाले हैं, you know, that scheme of things. And I also discussed the syllabus little bit in the very first lecture, okay, when I opened a few concepts of you know, international relations to you. कल हमने बात शुरू की in detail approaches को लेकर. So within your syllabus we have 4 different, you know, 4 different debates. Okay, that's why they are called early debates. And they began with what you see right now on the screen, realism. And this whole idea of realism and idealism together, they basically established the whole academic thinking, what we see today as international relations, you know. So theoretically, realism and idealism can be called the roots of international relations. ये कल भी हमने डिस्कस किया था कि broadly यही ऐसे दो traditions हैं, those which you know, more or less आप कहेंगे कि इन्हीं के ऊपर दूसरे opinions जो हैं they rest on them. Okay, so आने वाले approaches जितने भी हम discuss करने वाले हैं, either they lean towards realist ideas or they lean towards idealist ideas. There are very few approaches, very few ideas and opinions that exist in the international relations arena, those who actually propose a very different kind of alternative. In this context, we had already discussed yesterday how these theoretical frameworks are divided periodically or chronologically, how are they arranged. There was a time during the First World War where this whole idea of idealism or liberalism, which came into fashion. Okay, this was the very first opinion, very first perspective which came into existence. And then gradually, people started realizing that this is not enough, or maybe practically it is not that applicable as far as relations within different countries or different states is concerned. And that's where realist ideas, E.H. Carr, historian E.H. Carr is the first person who developed that kind of a thinking in the realism, you know, which is later called realism, or realist thinking was developed. Now, after realism and idealism emerged, naturally, theory ka there's a very basic principle of any theory, that is that they always tend to be, you know, analyzed, evaluated, and improved upon. All right. So similarly, after realism and realist thinkers wrote extensively about how relations should be maintained and how the new world order should be maintained, if there should be any world order, or, you know, states should concentrate on their own journey, and so on and so forth. And after they wrote extensively about it, there was a realization that totally you know, not supporting ideals or idealism in general or liberal ideas is not probably a very correct way of going ahead. And that's where neo-realism came into existence. Not that neo-realism is a kind of synthesis between realism and idealism. No, not at all. It is very much a part of realist tradition, but at the same time, it also realized some of the lacunae, some of the limitations of the realist approach and tried to incorporate them into their theory. We haven't touched upon neorealism a little bit. We did, in the last lecture where I was introducing the approaches. However, we are going to take it up today when we finish realism. Okay, so that's what. And then there was a second debate. This was the first part where we have realism, idealism, and neorealism. So remember, even if you get a question directly on realism, don't forget to mention this kind of a background, a little bit about idealism, a little bit about neorealism, and then move on to the realist approach. And similarly, if you get a question on idealism or liberalism, don't forget to mention that later on how realist thinkers or realism took over in a very grand manner, because by far realism has been a very most important approach in international relations, right? So that's how you move on ahead in the answers. You are supposed to deal with the whole debate. That's why they are mentioned together and they are understood together. Then after that, the next debate would be on the structural approaches, and we have a dependency framework. Dependency school is very vast, so obviously your syllabus is concentrating only on one theory. However, we will touch upon the basic principles of the dependency framework, and then world system approach by Wallstein. It's very important. Emmanuel Wallstein is a very important name because they were altogether it presented the world in a very different manner. Okay, this first set of debates, or the first set of ideas basically emanate from the fact that these all theories revolve around statecraft, and all the burden is to be borne by the state and the officials. But later on, and it does not recognize any other organization. Nothing is above state, all right? But next set of ideas which emerged, those which were called structural theories, whereby we are doing systems approach within that. So they started realizing that no country lives in isolation, and irrespective of the fact that states are responsible for the communication or for the interaction between each other, at the same time there are other non-state actors like different organizations, economic organizations, different cultural organizations, etc., etc. They are equally important. And that's why they view the world as a structure. There is a distinct structure within which each and every such organization, they are called non-state actors at time, and the state, they have their own role to play. So if the structure has to move smoothly, we have to ensure and make sure that all these, small structures within, or the whole system works in such a manner and everybody is playing their own respective role without interfering in the others, uh, ambit. Okay. So that was the second one, and that's why we are going to touch upon dependency school and the world systems theory. And the third one, the last one, would be from the contemporary, amongst the contemporary theories. Now, how contemporary theories are different from these older ones is that they basically, eventually you have to understand that the world is changing with each and every day. It's undergoing a lot of change. New issues, new concerns are emerging, it's coming up. And every day, some of the other concern of any other country is also impacting on everybody else's life, owing to the fact that it's like the world is called a global village. We live in the era of globalization, so world has shrunk. It's a small space, we all share that space. It's not like a state is operating on its own. Of course, there are countries, there are states who are maintaining that distance from everyone. But however, the development which takes place internally within any state has somewhere, impact on the other states as well. And also one more thing, that not only the political developments, but also the other realms, other sphere of influence as they are called, like economic or cultural or social, all these have some or the other reflection and impact on the other states as well. So whatever is happening inside one boundary has a considerable impact on the other side of the boundary as well. That is why the contemporary thinkers realized that merely talking about organizations, institutions, or state itself or its statecraft, it's not enough. Currently, we are dealing with a lot more, and that's why they started talking about post-structuralism. That's also another a part of your contemporary theories. Post-structuralism, post-colonialism. What happens when we don't have such structure? The structural theorists, they talked about a prism, they talked about the structure. They believe in a way, moving ahead with an organized manner. However, post-structural people, they talk about when you don't have a distinct structure, how you deal with the situation. Post-colonialism, green politics. Green politics talks about the environmental concerns, the climate change, which is affecting everyone. All right. So all this, carbon emission, Kyoto Protocol, everything was dealt in within this. And some people would not imagine these as to be part of international relations, but they are very much part of international relations because they concern everybody's life. So the New Age thinkers started looking at the world's problem not from a state perspective, from the non-state actors' perspective. One such idea is the feminist thinking, and that is part of your syllabus, which we will take up later. The feminist approach, obviously, as you have done this exercise in political theory earlier also, and all the subjects you have been reading about feminism, the basic idea of feminism is they attack the patriarchal system, they attack the male domination. So very similar to that, that being the basic premise of their thinking, in the international arena also they feel that it's a very male dominated arena and females are not getting adequate recognition, they are belittled, and that's why they don't realize their complete potential. We'll take it up in detail later, however. So coming back to today, we are going to first finish our discussion on realism, then we'll move on to the dependency theory if time permits, otherwise we'll continue tomorrow. Okay, so realism, idealism and neorealism, as we have discussed yesterday, कल हमने क्या डिस्कस किया? We introduced the idea. तो ये idea, इसके sources क्या हैं? इस approach के sources क्या हैं? They have taken inspiration from Kautilya's writing, Arthashastra. They have taken inspiration from Niccolo Machiavelli's writing, Italian thinker who talks extensively about statecraft. Okay. So, for the realist thinkers, one thing is very clear. I mean, two basic things you have to understand is, one, that state is very, very important for them beyond everything else. Okay. And second thing is the idea of human beings or the human nature. Essentially for them, the human nature is one which is very close to how Thomas Hobbes imagined. Thomas Hobbes is the main thinker in political theory. I'm sure all of you have read Thomas Hobbes earlier also. His idea of individuals or individualism, as far as Hobbes is concerned, he imagines a person who is eternally selfish. He has his own self-interest to guard always. That's how the political thinkers in realist tradition also imagine the state as to be. The state is concerned with its own self-interest. which is often dubbed as national interest. So the primary role of any state would be to protect its interest, to always protect its national interest, right? This is one. And second one, as I said, that the state being in control, everything else is non-existent for them. So they don't recognize non-actors, like we talked about the issues. Anyway, when the writings emerged, when Hans Morgenthau was writing 1972 or E.H. Carr was writing earlier than that, so at that point of time, of course, the issues which touch upon the lives of people today, like we had just a recent pandemic, corona, or the environmental concerns, ozone depletion and carbon emission, all these were not of much concern. So that's why state was played the pivotal role in establishing any kind of relation with the other state. So state was the most important one. Okay. Right. So moving on, we try to establish the difference between the idealists and the realists. And I'm quickly going to read here if you can see. Yeah. So here if you can see that after discussing the sources realists are drawing from, the Kautilya's and Machiavelli, how they present the picture of state like an individual who's just concerned with self-interest guides that individual. So similarly, the state is also guided by the fact that national interest is most important for them. Okay, and that's an end. They are not concerned with the means, how you reach that goal. Okay, so in this respect, another important thing about realism is the idea of power. So for the state to protect itself, for the state to realize its goal, for the state to maintain any kind of stability, power is something which is very, very important. So if a state is powerful, these all things comes naturally and easily. If the state is not powerful, then it has to submit to the strong one. There is a hierarchy that has to be obeyed in the world structure. This is also one thing the realist would always agree. There is a hierarchy. Strong and weak, they exist. Okay. What about the idealist? Idealist, those who were very much, enamored or influenced by the liberal tradition. Now, their idea, as far as the human beings is concerned, was very, very exactly opposite to the realist tradition. They never, their idea of human nature was that human beings essentially are good. When they are good, they would always do good and expect good. So eventually, human nature is such that all human beings believe in cooperation and coexistence. They want to stay together. So that's why they would do anything to avoid and to overcome warlike situation. They don't want to go into wars. They don't want any tyranny. That means strict control over themselves. That's why they will give themselves a world which has some kind of equality, where the strong is not ruling the weak, but rather everybody is getting an equal space. Okay, so idealism is also called utopian thinking by many realist thinkers, especially Carr has commented, E.H. Carr has commented that it's a utopian thinking. Utopian means something which is fiction, it doesn't exist and it's imaginary. Something which is utopian, you just imagine. So that utopian idea perhaps is because too much goodness is being asked for, right? So realists believe that this is not possible. It's too ideal. Power cannot be taken away from politics. Power is the reality. But idealists argue that the nation states, they want to develop, they want to progress, they want to grow. Why would they indulge in fight? Because any war, even if it is from, initiated from one side, it has some of the kind destruction for everyone. It brings destruction, it brings backwardness. So why would any state want that? And that is why, for crucial point, is that power is not something very important for idealists, whereas for realists, power is the most important thing. So idealists believe in use of reason, that everybody's capability of reasoning out. So they would choose a peaceful way of coexisting rather than getting in fight for each other. Then inequality. They always talk about, they are always against inequality, and that's why they promote education and science, so that development can come, real development can come to people. Okay, so people who were more or less big names which are associated with idealists, there would be many more. When you go through the book, there would be many more names. Saint Simon, Aldous Huxley, as you can see written here, Mahatma Gandhi, and Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was the most important name as far as idealist tradition is concerned. So uh, their whole idea rests on not power but morality, ethics, values. Okay, morality, naitikta. Everybody should have some sense of morality. When you are moral, you don't tend to hurt each other. You don't want to disrespect others. Same goes with the states. Okay, they want the states to maintain that kind of a dignity where they do not interfere तो बहुत दूर की बात है, but they do not disrespect the existence of the other state, whether big or small. It doesn't matter whether it's a big state or small state, and how much are they, uh, you know, uh, how much are they able to provide or contribute in the world economy, but their existence is simply because they are a state and they have to be respected. Okay, so we can strong, these words do not then come into existence because everybody gets respected equally. And for that idea, they believe that there has to be some world order. There has to be some world order which is to be established. How this can be established? When you are so many, एक क्लास है, एक क्लास में अगर आप 50 बच्चे हैं, so how are you going to establish a certain amount of order? Because all the kids have different ideas. अगर कोई पिकनिक पे जाना चाहता है, कोई क्लास करना चाहता है, कोई बाहर रहना चाहता है, you know, then how are you going to establish a certain order? Everybody has different kinds of goals. So for that, what you do in a class, you have a monitor, or maybe the teacher takes control, right? So similarly, they proposed that there has to be a world organization, one world organization, which is going to take up reasonably, it is going to adjudicate or decide upon different types of, or not adjudicate at that time, but it was just an idea that it will provide a certain level of stability to the world. The world will become stable, and that's how League of Nations was established. League of Nations was established in 1919-1920. It came into force in 1920 alongside the Treaty of Versailles. The whole idea was that already people have been devastated with the World War I, and that's how Woodrow Wilson proposed it. There were around 63 members in it, and however, USA was never a member of League of Nations. The idea of League of Nations was that all the countries would come more closer, they will understand each other, and there'll be more peace established across the world. That was the idea. But League of Nations failed, as we have seen, and later all these, the whole idea. In fact, it did not fail. One way of looking at it is that post 1945, in 1946, League of Nations was inoperative during the World War II. even if League of Nations were there, but countries went into war. So in that sense, people say that League of Nations failed because it could not prevent World War II. But after World War II also, the necessity remained that we need a world organization, we need a world order, and that's why United Nations came into existence. So actually, League of Nations is like a predecessor of United Nations. So basically, it was League of Nations which provided the base on which United Nations was formed. However, League of Nations failed for various other reasons too, but United Nations is still going strong and it promotes peace in the world. That's what it was proposed for. Anyway, so this is idealism. Now, the synthesis between this whole idealistic utopianism and cynical realism is called eclectic approach or eclecticism, as you can see here. So this eclecticism talks about fusing these two, that both are valid, but we can't have one world because we can't be so practical like realists are saying. We can't be so practical, impractical, and sentimental and emotional like idealists. So what is the way out? We are saying that we try to use best of the both approaches, realist and idealist. Okay. However, it was not a very valid approach because it could not survive very in the long run in international relations. But probably this whole eclectic idea, bringing both the worlds together, is seen later in the contemporary approaches. That whole idea of bringing in best of both idealism and realism is sometimes visible in the new approaches or contemporary approaches which came much later. All right, so let's just talk about the evolution. Okay, we'll start with the evolution now and we'll go ahead with the tenets and basic principles of realism, because realism is more important and has more things to talk about and say rather than idealism. So let's talk about the evolution of realism first. Realism has inherited, I'm reading from this, as you can see, realism has inherited a long and rich intellectual tradition. Its principal claims can be found in important works from Greece, Rome, India, and China. These are the sources. All right, this we discussed yesterday as well, that Thucydides's writings, Kautilya's Arthashastra, Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, and Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. All these were the sources which very much influenced the thinking of realist thinkers that we have already discussed. Now I'm just moving ahead. Uh, right. So, E.H. Carr, Edward Hallett Carr, he's much more famous with the name E.H. Carr. His name is Edward Hallett Carr. He's a noted historian. There is a very small book which goes by the name What is History, written by E.H. Carr. If you really are very much interested in this, knowing about what happened in that time period, the World War I and World War II, then I would recommend that you can read that very small book. It is What is History. It's a very nice book. So you can also read that book if you get hold of it. Then you will have a basic understanding of what was the international scene at that time. Okay, so that famous historian was a diplomat and journalist of British origin. In his famous book, 20 Years of Crisis. This is the name of the book which presents his realist ideas. Okay, so Carr had aimed at developing a foundation of international politics to be based on realist thinking. He's basically founding member, or as we can say. So with his emphasis on realist thinking, Carr had wanted to correct the imagination of world politics. Why is he saying correct the imagination? Because at the same time, idealist thinking had already come. Idealist thinking, as I say, was established right after World War I, and he wrote a book after many years, and that's why he's saying that at that time idealism was already uh, it had already emerged and it was very much in fashion. Everybody was, all the thinkers were, and all the international political scientists were also thinking in the same manner. So idealism had already come, and that is what he wanted to negate, he wanted to cut down, and he wanted everybody to correct their thinking, that utopian wishing, which means that you only wish it was a better world, you only wish that there would be peace everywhere. That is imagination as far as car is concerned. Everybody else is thinking that it is quite practical to live peacefully. However, realists like Carr do not think that it is very practical. They think it is just merely wishing. There is no action, and you are not thinking, you are not seeing the truth. All right. So that's how he advocated realism over liberalism or over idealism. Now, before that, we go into how he advocates realism. We also discussed about how idealism came into existence. First World War brought devastation for the imperial powers of Europe, especially the vanquished Central Powers. Now, the idea after First World War was that how to prevent reoccurrence of another similar destructive war. How to prevent that people should not get destroyed, or there should not be so much destruction. That is where US President Woodrow Wilson, he came up with the 14-point program. Any book and article which you are referring for this paper will have those 14 points, within which he talks about establishing a League of Nations. League of Nations in 1919 was established. He proposed that has to be codification of customary international law. There has to be some set of rules and regulations that will always help in establishing a more peaceful atmosphere. All right, this is the basic thing. Two more proposals he made, apart from, talking about the laws, the principle of collective security. All the states till then were more concerned about their individual security. There was no idea of collective security, that together we can form an organization which can go into, which can help all the states who are members, not the non-members, mind you. Not everybody was agreeing with this, so not everyone across the world was a member. So all the members will have an organization which will kind of provide collective security to everyone, where a nation perhaps maybe is feeling threatened can go to this organization and appeal for peace. So that idea, it started from there. And in UN also we have several peacekeeping missions, and UN is taking up the prevention of certain destructions across the state. So that idea of collective security was also in one of the charters of the League at that time, which is later taken up in the UN as well. And second thing, so League of Nations, the idea of collective security. And the second thing Wilson proposed was the right to self-determination. It is there within the 14-point principle, but these are the most important ones. What is this right to self-determination of minorities in Europe? Basically, it was the time when colonies were getting independent. Okay, and colonialism, as you know, was very exploitative by nature, and it never gave a chance for the minorities to be represented, to to have a voice of their own. So that's how Wilson was of the opinion that the European colonies, those who were already independent, should have the right to self-determination, in the sense, even if they have a state of their own, they should have a say in that international organization. They can become a member, and um, they have a right to be protected. Okay. However, all these ideals sounded very nice and everybody abided by that for some time, but it was very short-lived. Europe was back to its expansionist ideas, and then expansionism again took place, and that's how World War II took place in 1939. And the idea of disarmament, collective security, they proved to be non-existent at that time. But at the same time, we have to realize that all these ideas, because they're still of valid concern, that's how even after many, many years, United Nations came into existence. His ideals, they stood abandoned for a few years. There were not many people were using those ideas, but of course they bounced back in the you know face of world politics in the shape of United Nations. So we still have an organization which tries to adhere to the ideas of collective security, which tries to adhere to the ideas of having a certain codification or international laws, as they are called, for all the states. We also have those ideals where even newly found countries and all the countries do not have any kind of hierarchy amongst them. That's what Wilson was aiming at, having some kind of equality, and all the minorities, especially from Europe, he was talking at that time. Now, United Nations had it has expanded across the globe. So, in Europe also, the minorities or the different ethnicities, those which are scattered everywhere, they will have a right of self-determination whereby they can politically get represented. Okay, all right. So now we will look into some of the basic tenets of classical realism. There are certain principles of any approaches. What are the main principles on which this approach lies on? We will discuss that. A. International politics is power politics. Very clear it is that classical realism, which is also called political realism, claims to offer an account of international relations that is realistic. There is no idealism and there is no wishful thinking. Global politics is first and last about power and self-interest. This is why classical realism is also called power politics. Model of international politics, right? It's a power politics. Hans Morgenthau is very important name. Hans Morgenthau wrote how he's looking at the international scene. Politics is a struggle for power over men, and whatever its ultimate aim may be, power is its ultimate or immediate goal, and the modes of acquiring, maintaining, and demonstrating it determines the technique of political action. So everything, whatever a state does, is in the for to protect itself and the struggle for power to gain more power in the world scenario. So first is international politics is power politics. Power is something which is uh, you know it's a permanent part and it exists everywhere across the globe. Second is state egoism and conflict. Okay, the nature of state they are basically talking about. What is that? Let's look into that. Man is selfish and competitive. As I told you, they are influenced by Thomas Hobbes's individual nature. Human nature is selfish and it's very competitive. Okay. In other words, egoism is the defining characteristic of human nature. Exactly same is true of the state. So just like a man is selfish and competitive, the state is similar to that. Further, state system operates in a context of international anarchy. Anarchy means arajakta, which means lawlessness, chaos. The situation is completely out of hand. It's chaotic. Okay, there is no law. The core theme of realist theory can therefore be summed up in the equation. There is the equation which Morgenthau explains, that is egoism plus anarchy is equal to power politics. This perhaps you can also, you know, uh, write in your answers. Egoism plus anarchy is equal to power politics. This equation is the crux of realist thinking. A particular feature of classical realism is it strongly explains power politics in terms of egoism. Okay, how did this idea of human selfishness and international anarchy shape the realist understanding? Let's see. There are three arguments given in favor of why they think the state is selfish. First, realists accept that no form of world government can ever be established. It means that international politics is conducted within what in effect is an international state of nature. The international arena is therefore dangerous and very uncertain. It's unpredictable. You never know what the other country is planning. So, with order and stability always being the exception rather than the rule. So, order and stability are difficult because the other opponent or the other party is completely, unpredictable and uncertain. Therefore, the situation is very dangerous. So, which means that world government established karna is next to impossible for them. Second, they are saying that taking a cue from Machiavelli and Hobbes's description of the nature of individual, that is this point we have already discussed, that realists view state as rational, calculating, guided by self-interest, and working as coherent units. Coherent means that they are not uh, related to each other, but rather separate ones. But they are related because they are important actors of the same stage. Okay, they regard themselves as the most important actors on the world stage. When you assume a very important position that I am important at the world stage, this is what the states do. They assert themselves. Third, and very crucially, the fact that states are composed of and led by people who are inherently selfish, greedy, and power seeking means that state behavior cannot but is inevitably bound to exhibit the same characters. See, they because they really believe in Hobbes's idea or Hobbesian idea of state of nature and human nature. So they believe that